guys, and welcome. I am Ashley with Lavish Grace Photography, and today I want to talk a little bit about editing. So I have been a portrait photographer for 12 years now, and I've definitely gone through all of the phases in editing when you are learning how to edit. And I recently had to go through another learning phase of editing when I switched to the Canon R6. I shot with the 5D series for the majority of my career, and then a year and a half ago, almost 2 years ago now, I switched to the Canon R6 and had a little trouble in the beginning getting my edits to match up with my 5D Mark III. So I thought I would sit down and show you how I edit my R6 images. I've seen several people on various Facebook groups that I'm in asking for help and commenting, saying they can't quite get their images the way that they want them to look. And I totally understand that. I have had to learn a different way of editing, get my images the way that I want and to fit my style. So I am just going to preface this by saying this is how I edit. This is for my particular style. Every single photographer edits slightly differently or majorly differently. I just wanted to walk you through my process of how I edit my images. So we're gonna go to a screen recording, and I'm just gonna talk through step by step what I do after I have. If you want to see my editing workflow, I have a video on that, but after I have them culled and imported, I'm showing you how I edit a single image. So I may edit a few images just so you can see different scenarios, but let's get into this. All right, so I'm going to walk you through how I edit my images. I'm going to pick a couple of different ones. We're going to start with this one. This was taken on the R6 with my 50mm 1.2. It was shot at f1.2, ISO 100. You can see the settings here. So the first thing that I do to all of my images, I don't really like presets. I don't buy presets, but I do make a preset that I put on all of my photos as a starting point. I used to have this one, which is called General. And basically all it does is changes my color profile and then adds clarity and vibrance. As I've started editing the R6 files more, I have tweaked this, and I've noticed that I do pretty much the same thing to every photo. The things that I do the same, I made a new one, and I called it Ashley's Contrast. Now, when I put it on there right away, it is going to look a little bit weird, but basically puts a backward C curve right here. And then in my tone curve, I have another backward C, which this should actually be a little bit lower right there. I'm not sure. I need to change that. And then on this one, I have the very, very slightest S curve. Now I do this to most of my photos, and I will go in and tweak this depending on the photo, but since I do this to every single image now, I just made it a preset, so it saves me a little bit of time. So that's the beginning. Let's go back to what it looked like to start with. So going back to the color profile, if you don't know what a color profile is, basically there's a drop down here and you can change their different color profiles. And no matter how I edited my photos, I never liked the way the colors looked with any of the Adobe color profiles. So I ended up getting the color fidelity right here. I bought the color fidelity profiles, and I put standard on all of my images. So it changes just the slightest bit in the coloring, but there are different color profiles here that you can use. But basically, I use CF standard V1 on all of my images. So instead of going through here and clicking on it, I have it in my preset. So we're going to start with Ashley's Contrast. And again, that changes my color profile. It does a backward C. I have 10 clarity, 15 vibrance, and then my backward C again, and my S curve. So that is all my preset does, and that is my starting point. So from here, I will get the exposure about where I want it, and that's probably about like I like it. From here, you'll want to get your exposure and your contrast first before you change any coloring, because if you mess with the contrast, it tends to warm your image a little bit. So I get my exposure and my contrast before I touch any color. So now I will go into the color, and I do not like green tinted images. I like more towards the pink side. So I always bump this up quite a bit, and I will do it. I like to just type in numbers instead of sliding it for some reason. So I do 9, I do 12, depending on what I need, and sometimes even more. You can see what 20 looks like. Actually, that's probably a little bit better. So I like having a little bit of pink to the skin. So I'm going to put it back at 12, and then my temperature, I'm going to put it at 6200 and see what that looks like. Now the image is looking a little bit more clean, a little bit more true to life, I guess. So this is pretty close to how I would edit the photo. Other things that I adjust when the skin tone just isn't working for me, especially if there's a lot of green in the image, I will pull this side over. You can see in the background what it does to the greens, but there's not a whole lot of green in this image, so it's not going to affect the skin tones too much. But the other thing is I will go to the green primary. You will notice a trend. The greens are the ones I adjust the most to get my skin tones the way I do. So I'm going to do this drastically. Again, this puts a little bit more pink in the skin. Going back down does a little bit more yellow. So if my skin tones are looking a little yellow and blah, I will pull the green primary up a little bit, and that makes it look so much better to me. That's my basic edits for an image. I do not like doing a whole lot of skin retouching. Let me go to 100% crop. If there's a blemish or something, I will clone it out. But in general, I don't like touching the skin too much. I feel like if you have the right edit and exposure, it will automatically make the skin look a little bit better. Especially one thing I've discovered helps for some reason skin tones is this right here. Pulling up your lights. Again, you don't want to go too far because then it looks too much, but I will adjust this to where I want it for each individual photo, and the shadows as well. But that is a pretty standard edit for me. Let me look at how I actually edited the photo. It's just slightly different from my original, but that's basically how I edit that photo. Okay, so I have moved to a different session. I wanted to edit some photos with some more greenery, because those are always the ones that can be the most problematic for skin tones. This one is a fairly clean image. I do have the pavement in front of her that's reflecting instead of green grass. Just a tip: when you're shooting around greenery, try not to have the greenery directly under them or in front of them, bouncing the light off of the green grass. But that will help you in your editing process a lot. But I'm going to edit this one from start to finish without using my preset, so you can see exactly everything that I do. So first I will go to my color fidelity, standard. So that's my first step. And then I'm going to go through and give my contrast. So I'm going to change all my highlights, shadows, whites, blacks, all those sliders that I was talking about. So we're going to do highlights down, shadows and whites up, and blacks down. You can see that has already added a little contrast. I always do 10 on clarity, 15 on vibrance, slightest little adjustment, but I do it to everything. And then we're going to go into our tone curve, and we're going to do the same thing. We're going to do a backward C. So down, up, up, and down. This is where you get quite a bit of that contrast. Already looking so pretty. And then I'm going to come back here, click on this button, and this is where I do the smallest S curve possible. So first I'm going to over dramatic it. You can see this is way too much. And then I pull it down to where it's like literally right above the line and below the line, just the slightest amount. Now, after I do all of these, if the photo was properly exposed to begin with, it will be overexposed now because I have pulled up the lights and everything. So it is now obviously too bright. So this is where I hit the minus button, and let's go down to negative 0.3. So again, some of the sliders I don't actually use. I use keyboard shortcuts. But anyways, I brought the exposure down. That looks perfect to me. Now that I have my exposure and contrast where I want it, now I'm going to mess with my temperature. So again, I'm going to put my tint. We're going to put this one at 15. When there's a lot more green in the photo, I bring it up a little bit more. So I'm going to start at 15, which looks pretty good. And then I think the warmth is kind of where I want it. It's kind of perfect. So we're going to leave it at 6900. All right, this is close to finished, but the greens are not exactly how I would like them. So this right here is a personal preference. If you want your greens more yellow, you can bring it down. If you want them more green, you can bring it up. I think going either direction too much can make it look too fake, especially if you do this. That's too much. Although if you did do that and then you brought the saturation down, that's pretty too, but let's clear that. And if you're wanting more of a fall look, you can totally bring that down and play with your sliders, see what they do. But anyways, for me, what I like to edit, I'm going to put my green at 17. That just makes them look a little bit less yellow, and it also takes a little bit more of the yellowy out of the skin tone. And then the last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go down to my green primary, and I'm going to bump this up as well. So let's put this at about 13. So that right there is an edited image. Let me show you the before and the after. That is how I edit that image. One other thing that I will do for skin tones, if it needs a little bit more warmth in the skin tone, but I don't want it to be too yellow, I will go to color grading. And I usually just play with the highlights unless it needs more. But the hue, I put it at 35. And then the saturation here, I'm going to show you what the hue does. So you can see in the brighter parts of the photo, it adds this orange color. But I will usually just do a tiny, tiny bit. If it needs a little bit more, I normally don't go above 10 or 15 on that. You can kind of see what it does just a tiny, tiny bit. It adds just a little bit of warmth. So that right there is the finished photo, and it's gorgeous. I love it. I love the greenery photos. Okay, let me find one more that's a little bit more difficult to edit, and that'll be the last one. All right, so I'm going to edit one more shot. So first I'm going to put my contrast on there. Again, it was properly exposed, so it's going to look very overexposed now. I'm going to what is this called? The exposure down a little bit. The coloring is obviously way off, but the exposure looks better. I do think the lights are a little too bright, so I'm going to pull this back down here. That looks better. So again, the first thing I want to do is address those greens. I don't like the greens. I'm going to go for 15 and start there. And then I'm going to bump it to 20. That looks a little bit better to me. That says 30. That's why that's too much. There we go. So that actually looks so much better already, but let's go ahead and I'm going to go down to the greens in the HSL. Click that up a little bit. Right about there. That's where I want it. And then green primary, I'm going to do the same. Again, this is what the green primary does, just so you can kind of see the drastic, but that's about where I want it. That is looking beautiful. I do want to add just a tiny bit of warmth to her skin. So I'm going to go to the color grading. Again, I do 35. I'm going to hit 9. That looks beautiful. Yep, I like that a lot. Before I do that, we're going to click on, this is the mask tool, and I want to select the sky. This is a cloudy day, and I want to see those clouds a little bit more, so the mask will highlight just the sky, and I'm going to bring some of those highlights down in the sky, and the exposure down just a little bit. I don't want to do it like too much, you know, but I do want to be able to see that there are clouds in the sky. So yeah, that looks beautiful. Oh, see, that's so pretty. So I feel like her face actually does need to be a little bit brighter. So I'm going to go back to these lights and bump it up just ever so slightly. That's pretty. And you'll find when you're editing, especially like the coloring of your images, you're going to sometimes go back and forth a lot. You'll add something and then when you move something else you don't like what you added before. So my color grading, I feel like it's too much. So I'm going to bump that back down to 5. And I know these are like minute, tiny little changes that most people don't see, but when you start editing and staring at pictures, you see color differently. Yeah, there's still something slightly off in this picture for me. And so I could totally stare at this for, 30 minutes and not figure it out. But this is when you kind of start moving your sliders around, trying to figure out what it is that you need to change more and move them around and see what they do. Sometimes it just takes a little bitty tweak to make something look better. And you can always hit this turn off those calibrations, turn them off and on to see if that's maybe what it was. And that actually looks pretty good. So this is about where I want to leave it. I do want a little bit more in the blacks. So I'm going to go here and I'm going to pull this slider down just a little bit more, and that's where I want to leave it. So here is the before the edit and after. The coloring looks so much better now. And you can see that sky. It doesn't look over processed. And again, this is all relative to what your opinion is, but yeah, I like that one a lot. I think I'm actually going to post this one. So cute. All right, so I think that's the last one we're going to do. All right, so that's just a little glimpse at how I edit my images from my Canon R6. I hope that this was helpful. And if you are struggling with editing your images, if you have any specific questions for me, leave them in the comments below. I would love to help you out if I can. But that's gonna wrap it up for this video, guys. If you did enjoy this, please give it a thumbs up. And if you haven't already and wanna see future videos, hit that subscribe button down below, and I will see you guys next time. Bye. If you have any other tips for If you have any tips, also let's talk about it. Okay, now we gotta screen record. Let's restart this.